We're going to try to build off what was started in the previous panel, which is leaving some time for some interaction and some questions. So the way we're going to try to operate is I'm going to introduce the members of the panel. I'm going to give them a couple of minutes each to do a little stage setting, to talk about what's going on in their department and agency in cloud, especially in the collaboration arena. I have a question or two to initiate the discussion, and at that point, it's really open for you to weigh in. And if I don't see your hand because of the lighting, please feel free to call out for me, but do try to wait for the microphone to get to you so you can all hear. And I've tried to ensure that there'll be ample time for Q&A by taking the advice of my son on our walk over here this morning. And we were talking about the session, and I asked him whether he had any advice for me, and he said, "Don't even try to be funny, Dad." Said, like, Ian, I really am a naturally humorous guy. No, you're not. You only think you are. So that saved like 10 minutes of the discussion. So let me introduce our panel members here, and then we'll come back in reverse order, giving them time to make some opening remarks. Then we'll move right into the session. So on my immediate left here is John Skudlarek, who's the Deputy CIO at the Federal Communications Commission. He has the enviable role of being deputy to the world-renowned David Bray, who's the CIO there. Very active on the speaking circuit, one of the most active CIOs in public-private sector on social media. That's only possible because John's back at the FCC doing all the work. I don't use that as my introduction for David, but I will use it today. So next to John is Karen Petroska, who's the senior executive in the office of the CIO out at NASA headquarters. And of course, NASA, besides its renowned accomplishments in space, is well known within the federal community because it always shows up in the OPM and Partnership for Public Service surveys as being among the best places to work in government. So that's why Karen has that smile on her face today. And then next to Karen is Rusty Pickens, who's a senior advisor for digital platforms at the State Department. State Department has been in the lead in this administration from the very get-go about using social media and citizen engagement tools as an extension of this nation and the Secretary's public diplomacy efforts. So Rusty, let's start with you and come back down through. Talk a little bit about how the State Department is using cloud and especially in that collaboration arena.
Sure, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
No. Are you on?
Check, test.
Stepping up to the stairs. Hey, can we get the handheld mics?
Or you could go, why don't you go up to the podium, Rusty?
I think they're going to bring out the...
Check, test. Nope.
No, that's not working.
Good.
Somebody must have kicked it. It was probably me.
Check, test. There we go. All right. Hi, folks. So my name's Rusty Pickens. Happy to be here today. So I am a newbie to the State Department, full disclosure up front. I just joined the agency in October. Before that was at White House and have really been around trying to help with cloud computing and sort of serving the president in an IT capacity and bring my ops skills to that regard. And what I'm doing these days, State Department's really big. My little bureau is called IIP, so International Information Programs, and we have a pretty cool job in that we basically support all the public diplomats all over the world. So IT infrastructure and technology and tools that they can use, and then a little bit of content and programming for them. So really, what we're selling in terms of government is American values overseas. So any other foreign audience member or citizen that is interested in what's going on with America can go to our embassy websites, find this information, follow us on Twitter and Facebook and all this other stuff, right? So we'll probably get into this a little more. We are embarking upon lots of different cloud sort of experiments and pilot projects. We're doing a lot around productivity tools like Google Apps for Business and Slack there. My personal pet project is rolling out Salesforce and doing contact management globally. And it's got a little bit of collaboration baked into it that I can talk to. But just sort of, you know, an a la carte approach. We've got a lot of cloud going on. We're doing it in sort of a pilot, sort of experimental, more forward-leaning manner, seeing what sticks, what the PD people like, and then hopefully sort of pivoting that and making that a little more institutional as we go. So happy to be here and answer any questions you have about that stuff.
Thanks, Rusty. So I am responsible for the deployment of cloud at NASA, and we've taken an enterprise approach to making cloud available for NASA in that the CIO organization is responsible for being the provider of it, and what we've done is built a framework or a platform that takes care of the things that make it hard to get started in cloud. So we take care of the security aspects, integration with FISMA and FedRAMP, your security plan. We take care of high bandwidth connectivity into the various clouds so that you don't have to go to the network group 15,000 different times, right, to get the connectivity you need. And ICAM integration, so we can use smart card with our cloud-based applications. Sorry.
Why don't you hand the handheld back to Rusty and see if your own microphone is working?
Check. Oh, they are. Awesome. Okay. So anyway, that's sort of our way to entice people to come to the cloud. And we know, I mean, NASA does a lot of science, a lot of engineering. We know that we have plenty of very interesting things that we could do in the cloud that could make various kinds of business improvements. And so we have been really focusing on bringing science and engineering to the cloud. Now, that said, collaboration, I mean, across the board, we do a lot of collaboration. So in science collaboration, we've got international partners, we have university partners, we have corporate partners. We have various engineering collaborations with other businesses. And then the public outreach. Trying to engage the public, especially in the school age, trying to entice them into being enthusiastic about what NASA's doing. So all across the board, we're looking at different kinds of collaboration technologies.
So if I can pick up on that point, so collaboration, does it mean engagement? Does it mean cooperation, coordination? Is it all of the above, or?
Yeah, in my definition, I would say that collaboration is anything where you can put people together and end up with a better value product out of the interaction.
Okay, Rusty, you're nodding in agreement.
I like that definition.
You like that definition?
Yeah, sure. I like to say that collaboration is sort of like Agile. Everybody says they do it, but are you really doing it? Are you doing it well? You know, and that's
all right. Well, I'll go to John to block here. So how do you talk a little bit about the FCC and how do you operationalize, define collaboration, or use it, especially in the FCC, internally and externally?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so is mine
Wait,
working?
your mic isn't working.
Yeah, okay. That doesn't work, team. Here we are at the museum, and nope, does it? Yes, maybe. Okay. All right. Can you hear me over there? I think you can, right? All right, excellent. All right. Well, anyway, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here. And wow, I was actually thinking, Alan, that at least we got the session before lunch and not the snooze fest after lunch. So maybe not so bad. Anyway, so anybody that's followed the FCC and followed my boss, maybe even heard me speak once or twice, knows that FCC is all in for cloud. I mean, you can even quote me on that. Many of you may know that we actually moved our data center off-premise last year, put it into a remote facility at a alternate location. And that was really an intermediate step for us. We like to think of it as crossing the digital Rubicon towards ultimately putting all of our applications into the cloud, whether that be on a very limited basis infrastructure as a service, but ultimately we've implemented Office 365 and some other software as a service tools, and we're looking as the fundamental point of our modernization to go into platform as a service, and bucking the GSA trend, we actually are implementing ServiceNow for our licensing modernization. All right, so you want me to have that back? Okay, the gentleman said he could hear me, so I'm just confused. Won't be the last time.
Technology, you know, I mean.
Okay, so is that any better or no? Great. You don't want me to?
You don't have to start over.
I was going to say, you don't want me to start over. Okay, great. So, you know, we think about doing cloud for a lot of reasons, and I have to say that the topic of this panel, collaboration, it was like, well, I haven't really thought about it so much in terms of collaboration, right? So,
What do you think about it?
well,
Settings?
I'm about to tell you.
All right.
So, but I'm going to go back to your collaboration thing, because that's internally, we have actually rolled out Office 365 and OneDrive, and we're rolling out Jabber now so that we can do shared desktop and we can do IM, and ultimately we'd like to get into desktop VTC. And I know in the last panel they talked about bandwidth and network, and that certainly is a consideration there. But you know, for your basic staff working with each other, talking, being able to collaborate on a document, you know, that's certainly part of our move to the cloud. But really, when I think about collaboration, I think about how we've just served up a data set. We actually are using Socrata to do that, and we've served up a data set from our Consumer Help Center. So now, where before you could go into our Consumer Help Center, which itself is cloud-based, and look at the data, we've now made the data available on a platform where anybody can go in and manipulate it and download it and do what they want with it. And we had previously participated like in data.gov, but you know, as I remember, they said, everyone give us your data set. So everybody did, and then the data sat there and got stale. So what we're excited about now is serving up near real-time data, and that's just the first of a number of areas where we expect to make our information, our data, more readily available to our stakeholders, whoever they are, whether it's consumers that are interested to know how many slamming calls were reported last month, or whether it's broadcasters who are wondering the same thing, or telephone providers. So it's exciting stuff, and there's a lot more to follow.
So let's pick up on that and go back down the panel. So you touched on this a little bit. So what are the metrics or indicators that define success in this? Whether it's the public diplomacy, whether it's the interaction with your consumers. How do you operationalize and measure, define?
Yeah, Alan, test, check. You can hear me again? So some of that's really hard to define, and so the way that I like to talk about this is some of those processes that you have today, they're probably based in email or Microsoft Outlook. You probably haven't been measuring that stuff before, so it's really hard to figure out what was our before picture versus the after picture. But I think one metric that's really easy is how many of these crazy reply all email threads have we killed by having a good collaboration tool, right? So just one channel or one team and not having to worry about sorting back through 1,000 messages to find this stuff. That's a really easy one. The other one is approval processes, and I suspect every federal agency has these, right? But we do a lot of this at the State Department, clearing cables that have to go out to all the posts. So those may have to be cleared by 7, 10, 20 people. Finding that, figuring out who had the last best version, who has signed off on it, all of those things tend to get lost a little bit, and you can't quite tell where it is at any one moment or who has the ball. That stuff is going to be so much more trackable if we can move it into some of these modern tools and collaborate around that. Go find the latest, greatest version easily. Anybody can take a look at it. You can see who owns it right now. But that stuff really wasn't able to be quantified before. Like how?
So do you capture that now?
So we're
okay.
moving that way. Yeah, we haven't actually operationalized a lot of that stuff. Like we are sort of juggling two different systems. So there's the State Department.
But you define the metrics now that you want to capture, and
Yes,
you'll
absolutely.
be,
And sort of
okay.
figuring that also, figuring that out together with our field staff and our teams out at Post of what's important to you, how are you going to use this thing, and sort of backing into some of those metrics and figuring that out after the fact.
So maybe taking a little bit different spin on it, thinking of collaborative teams working together. And when you go into an activity like that, you obviously start it to achieve some sort of outcome. So I guess the first question is, the end of your collaboration, did you achieve your outcome? And then you might do a relative comparison, say based on, well, how did we do last time versus how did we do this time? Or look to at measurements, at something quantifiable from your previous result, and say, well, we wanted to get 20% better this time. Did we get 20% better? I mean, those are the kinds of things that I would kind of look for in terms of metrics to calculate success.
So one thing that I didn't mention is the fact that we've gone all VDI. And that's enabled us to greatly expand our ability to support telework. So if you want to look for collaboration metrics, actually, maybe it's a stretch, maybe it's not, but after the African Summit last year and then the Pope's visit and now Metrogeddon in all of its unfolding splendor, one of our metrics is we measure how many external VDI sessions can we concurrently support, and we did a lot of work to beef up our VDI infrastructure so that we could virtually run the FCC in a collaborative, extended manner. So that's kind of a big one. Another one in terms of the new tools, the new platforms that we launched is time to deliver a service. Where we've gone from traditional waterfall, where it would take 30 days to gather requirements, we're now, using what I like to call agile methodology, because there's traditional agile, and then there's no kidding, really, how are we doing it? We're able to provide, and I can even start to say grooming and user stories and backlog, and I think I know what I mean, but we're actually able to deliver functionality to customers in 2 weeks. And when we come to pitfalls, I'll talk about that too. But time to market for some of these things is so much quicker. It's amazing. And going back to what Chad and Joe said earlier, ultimately it comes down to it's about the mission, right? It's about getting the mission done. So if we're doing all this cool IT and all this cool collaboration, we're not getting our jobs done or helping customers or helping stakeholders, it's pointless. So I think those are a couple things that we look at. And then in terms of putting our data sets out there, the metric is that we now have one data set out there, on this platform where we previously had 0, and our goal is to increase that, by at least 100%.
So before we move to the dismal downside risk and so on, are there questions from the audience? Anybody want to get in on this conversation in any fashion? We can get the mic to you.
It's on.
Way in the back here. Way in the back.
Have the mic up there.
No, we'll send one of our fastest MeriTalk people.
Oh.
To you. There she is, the always
Wait,
spry.
who's raising their hand?
She used to be faster chasing the kids, but
Hi, Tom Onsberger, support the Army. I always am nervous when we talk metrics and using metrics to validate something we adopted or to justify something we're going to do. And you said you looked at speed of delivery as one of the issues. And the question I have, and it's a concern, and as we always want a metric when sometimes they don't really exist, or there are so many other factors that influence the results that we get, is how do you isolate the collaboration tool capability of delivering speed versus all the other factors? For instance, agile development, or less requirements, or better hosting capabilities, and a contract in place, or something like that, or a better service provider. And because of that, I think we get driven often into investing in objects and promising results from the investment that we're held accountable for. When you move it to another environment, there's no relationships, but the money's already gone. So send that forward. Thanks.
I assume that was for me.
It can be.
Yeah, so for the record, I didn't say that it was the collaboration tool that caused us to achieve that. I think it was actually, as you put it really well, a combination of factors. But since we're trying to talk collaboration here, I was taking a little bit of poetic license to say, in as much as we've gone in this direction and we are using these new platforms and we do have this agility and we are in close contact with the stakeholders and we are working with them on a daily basis, literally, to make sure that we're giving them what they want. And of course, so I'll skip ahead to the downside. The downside is it means your stakeholders have to work with you every darn day, and sometimes they get tired of doing that, but just saying. So I think that it's very hard to isolate that metric, to be honest, but nonetheless, since you wanted metrics, Alan, I tried to come up with a couple.
Well, if I could contribute to this a little bit too, I mean, yes,
right?
you can blame my question, but I think many people are looking for a more performance-based, performance-driven government where we can show the difference, the consequences of the investment we're making. We get this all the time, whether it's at the macro level, what are we getting from the $80 to $100 billion we invest, down to what's the payback for 18 after the digital service cores. So both of those issues came up today. I'm not saying we're trying to find a specific correlation between we do X in the collaborative area and it produces Y benefit or increase in satisfaction with the FCC or NASA or the State Department. But we're trying to find like a family of metrics that are associated with the changes we make. And so we can talk to anybody who asks, whether it's the political official higher up in the organization, somebody on the Hill, IG's office, Government Accountability Office. Somebody's going to ask. And you really got to have some kind of answer. And I don't think it need be a specific correlation direct, but I think John spoke to it. There's a family of benefits that you can say are associated with these changes, and you could draw some relationship. But Karen and Rusty, I'd like your, weigh in on this too. What's your perspective? Or not weigh in?
I don't know. You want to take that, Rusty?
I don't think my mic is working still. So I would think, two halves of the collaboration coin, right? So I think the first part of the question was, how's collaboration working among your IT teams and your development teams? To me, most of that stuff is outsourced. So we are doing our software development through high-powered contractors who are really good at building this stuff. I'm assuming that is just a known quantity. So if you're coming to me with a project management tool, it's probably going to have collaboration baked into it. We can work that out among ourselves and just get going in the first sprint or two. I think the emphasis, though, needs to be a lot more on the how are we as IT folks and maybe enterprise IT providers working and collaborating with our customers. So in my case, that is an embassy or public diplomacy staff out in the field. That's where I've been spending a lot more time. Like, how do we stand up these channels? How do we sort of establish working norms among ourselves so that we're going to be able to serve you better as a customer? Maybe you can submit a feature request over this new tool that we're giving you. We're also sort of coaching them around, okay, now that you've got this brand new fancy platform and we're delivering product to you every 3 or 4 weeks, how do you use the collaboration tool that's already baked into it to organize yourselves or organize between, a country that is 12 time zones away back with DC and make sure that we're staying on message or that we're not spamming people with email. Really simple use cases around that, but tools that just haven't been available. In the old days, you would have had to have done that over Microsoft Outlook, and it would have been much more cumbersome. So that stuff, I think, there's many different ways to call it collaboration and who you're working with, but who are you collaborating with and what is your team trying to, produce as output, as Karen said. And I think you get to a better result there when you're focused on sort of the business side, the customer side, and less on the software side. Maybe that's the wrong answer, Alan, but I'm assuming that if you're an IT professional who can ship a lot of really fancy code for me, you're going to know how to collaborate. In fact, teach me how to collaborate, right?
Other questions?
Mike should be working now.
Okay. Check.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Hi, Dan Verton with MeriTalk. I want to go back to something, Rusty, you said, and I'm not picking on you with this, but you mentioned
That means he
an
will
example.
be picking
No,
up
no,
the
no.
rest
You
of
mentioned an example of, perhaps we have 7 to 10 people that have to be in an approval chain for a cable. So for the State Department, maybe 10 people approving a cable is appropriate. I don't know. But I'm sure that there are a lot of places in government where there are 10 people in an approval chain where it makes absolutely no sense. So we're talking about collaboration and making use of cloud and others for collaboration. How do we ensure, or are there discussions to ensure, that we're not automating bad process and that we're actually re-engineering bad process to leverage these new collaboration capabilities?
Yeah, sure. So good question. I think in our case here with my little bureau, IIP, we've got all these fancy new collaboration tools, but we aren't the owners of the overall process. We can't change the cable system. We don't have any influence over that. But we can drastically reduce the time it takes for us to do our part of it, right? So I think we stepped into a little bit of a brave new world there where okay, we don't have to do this by email anymore. Put that response to this paper into a Google Doc, and we're all going to collaborate around it in real time. And that forced us to think about, well, how are we going through this on our own? We've got 3 or 4 different verticals here who've got to sign off on this, and then it goes to the big boss, and he signs off on it. Then it moves along to its next step in the bigger chain. Well, we can shrink that part of what we had to do much, much quicker because now we had a new tool. So kind of forced us to rethink that a little bit, where it's like the light bulb came on, and oh yeah, that doesn't make any sense anymore because it's not a track changes Word doc and 3 revisions ago in an email, right? So I think that's one answer is control what you can, what's in your world, speed that up. The output is one final copy that we kick back to the larger approval process. But I think agencies, and maybe this is what we're going to talk about a little more, are you all in for cloud? Is your leadership bought into it? Do they believe in these tools being able to revolutionize the way you do work? And then go bite off the really big process questions and try to do that stuff because I don't think the
and
technology's
I'd say,
the problem.
we continually dialogue about the responsibility of the chief information officer, what should be in her or his array of responsibilities. The original Klinger-Cohn legislation that established that position in government, 20 years ago now, also gave that office the responsibility, 30, time flies, business processing re-engineering responsibility. So the thought was then that you would re-engineer the process and then apply technology to it so you would get the full benefit, not the kind of IT version of pave the cow path. And so we still struggle to do some of that, but you're right, we need to do both to get the full benefits of it. Did I see a question or another hand back here, or? All right. So the question has come up a couple of times on the election coming up and the transition that will follow. We've had cloud initiatives since the very beginning of this administration when Vivek Kundra was the CIO, and it's continued through Steve Van Rokel and now under Tony Scott. And the collaboration initiative was present at the beginning as well, because to some extent it moved in from the Obama campaign, where they made great use of social media and collaboration tools in securing his election. So is it firmly baked enough in government today that it's going to survive any transition? Because there really is a penchant when a new president comes in, whether even if it's of the same party, to say, I want to put my own mark on this, and all these things that are there right now, we're going to throw out and we're going to start down a new path. Karen and John, I'd start with you because I think you're both career people who've been in government a long time. Rusty's a little newer, so I'll give him more time to think of his answer. Karen, let's start with you.
Well, I don't really think that government so much is driving, but the adoption of all of these technologies just in the world, in the population, in the consumers, everywhere, right? It's pervasive. Try to get rid of it. I don't think you can. And so to tell, we've had that discussion before, bring your own device, use your government device, don't do that at work. Try to tell people not to use it, because those things, they're in all the communication paths.
Well, you can try to tell them. But...
Right? So I think we've lost control of that.
Well, it used to be that the government set the standards, right? There was actually a time, when we set the standards and we did a lot of really cool, big custom code kind of things. And, that like ship sailed.
Yep.
So we're not going to turn the clock back. I'm sure that the new administration, whoever gets elected, is going to have their own initiatives and their own spin on things. That's a given. But I think in terms of where we're going, and I'll go back to the technology, right? I mean, even if you said we're going to completely legislate turning the clock back and doing all these things different, I don't think it is physically possible to do, let alone you say let them try. But I mean, when you look at the compute power that's available and the economies of scale, and I think that there are a number of challenges, and we talked through some of them this morning, looking into the future, actually being able to price out what it's going to cost you to run cloud platforms, and looking at your SLAs and figuring out what storage, transactions, access, any of those kinds of things are going to end up being. But it's not like it's all figured out and perfect, not at the FCC, not anywhere. But I think in terms of where we're going and the opportunities that we can clearly see to have faster time to market, and I believe that's real, and have greater flexibility and have scalability, and being able to better meet the needs of consumers, whether they be in industry or the general public or even other government consumers, that's not going away. And I think that we are on an inexorable march forward. And now, based on this morning's presentations, we not only have Moore's Law, but we have Scott's Law. Right? Every 5 years, you'll get double your money's worth. So there you go. How's that?
I'm not sure it has the same traction as Moore's Law quite yet, but I'm sure it'll skyrocket from here. But Rusty, we've given you all this extra time to formulate an answer.
So I hope I come up with a really good answer. I would echo a lot of what John and Karen are saying. I don't think there's any way we're going to be able to stop. And honestly, I think the citizens are going to demand it of us, right? We are expected to perform on par with all of our private sector partners.
And since we have one candidate who is so very active on social media already, we could just springboard from that.
No comment. But so just in terms of general federal IT infrastructure, though, part of what I want to help us just generally break the mold of is settling for a little bit less, right? So Megan Smith, federal CTO, has a good quote of, the private sector has really cool websites. Why can't we have cool websites too? Well, we do, and we're getting better, but what if you woke up one morning and you think you're going to go, travel to another country and you need to look up visa information, you go online to find that, and oops, there's a 404 error and the website is down. Some people are going to say, well, it's the government, I'll try again tomorrow. No, it should never be down. This service should be available to you. You expect better of your government to do that, right? So as John was saying, we're going to have to provide these services quicker, faster. People demand it. They're already doing it for their online banking and every other aspect of their life. Why don't we do that for them for citizen services? So I don't think there's any stopping it. I think it's more of a question of how do you do cloud right and well, because cloud is here and you're never going to be able to turn it off at this point. You just need to employ it properly.
Do you look like you want to give a big foot stomp to that? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was actually thinking, I don't want to use somebody else's commercial tagline, but it is an app economy, right? I mean, look at the median age of all of us here, but think about who's coming up, who's graduating from school, who's in school, what are their expectations, and what do they think that they can do, and how much of it centers around one of these or something bigger. So in terms of the market and the demands, they are going to continue to multiply. The customer base, if you will, the stakeholder base, the citizenry, is not turning back the clock. So neither are we, I hope.
Other questions? Comments?
I have a comment, or what's a question?
Which one do you want to go first?
I'll just say,
Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, hi, Caroline Boyd with MeriTalk.
Okay.
Well, I actually, sit through all the discussions, so I get a really good picture of, the different points that everyone's bringing into the conversation. So my question I've been sort of wondering is, this morning Tony Scott did say, John, this 5-year, we'll ride the wave for 5 years. I mean, that doesn't, given what you just said and the generation coming up, my son can't even spell, but he can definitely use a computer and a tablet, no problem. I mean, in 5 years, I think if you're looking at that as a cycle, we're only talking about 2 potential refresh cycles by the time he goes to college. That just doesn't seem realistic to keep up with the demands of our citizens. So I'm just curious, John, you sort of touched on it, but what you think about that? What's more realistic for really seeing how quickly government can get up to speed with the tools that citizens are demanding?
So I would just ask if you think that by the time your son comes of age, everyone will just be communicating with emojis.
Potentially.
There you go. I've said I spent most of my career in the Department of Defense and proud of it. One of the things I love about where I am today is that the FCC, we're big enough that people know who we are, and we're small enough that we actually have the agility to get things done. I think we're in a very privileged place, and if we're trendsetters in some way, I'm grateful for that too. I think, broader government, when you look at like USDA, or I came from Commerce most recently, and you look at the challenges of multiple sub-organizations, some of which actually dwarf the departmental headquarters. Look at Commerce. We had somebody here from NAR, actually, but NOAA, NIST, Census Bureau. I mean, NOAA flies satellites, for God's sake. There's so much entropy there that even if you're on a 5-year refresh cycle, I applaud Tony for trying to do anything we can to kickstart the process in the broader government and get us moving off of legacy systems and get us into new platforms where we actually can consume more of our resources, providing additional services that are required and not paying 80% to maintain our existing infrastructure. But it's a challenge. I won't deny that.
But I would, picking up on some of John's points, we've had some discussion with Tony on this issue, and I really think his 5-year refresh was focused on like big government and capital letters with the major infrastructure. I don't think he was talking about refreshing your devices or your desktop or some of the applications or those kinds of things. I think he realizes those need to move on a much more rapid pace. But the kinds of things you're talking about in the big systems that are run at the Internal Revenue Service or Social Security or the National Weather Service or satellite programs, that's the kind of thing I think he was trying to move the cycle back toward a more 5-year period. We have time. We can do some wrap up, and we could do this in a lightning round, or we could take another question or so if there's any in the audience or the aromas from lunch have overcome you already. And
Everyone's getting hungry.
I got one over here.
okay, let's get the microphone out.
Hi, Rusty, you said something just a minute ago about how you all are being held to a similar standard as, say, commercial industry, right? One of the things I was kind of curious about is I think my perception is there is a necessary distinction, right? Because when we define mission as a company, it's shareholder, it's top and bottom line. When we define mission as a government, particularly DoD, for example, it's ensuring safety of the troops in the field, right? So to that end, is there a necessary distinction there that needs to be, I almost feel like some of it's an impossible standard, right? Because prioritizing things like security might take a whole different rationale behind it if you're someone in, say, the DoD, IC, wherever inside the federal government. So could you all just comment on that a little bit? Like, in the roles you're in, the necessity to modernize your system, sure, but do you agree or disagree there's a definite distinction between things like how you define mission and what standards maybe you need to be held to and where you prioritize?
Sure. Well, I think I can speak to that pretty generally, right? So I don't think, of course, there's never a one-to-one match between private sector and public sector, right? We are just held to an entirely different set of rules. And so some of that's a lot more scrutiny around things like security and records management and some of that stuff that maybe a company just doesn't have to worry about nearly as much. But in terms of the citizen services, I think the ability for the website to respond and for you to find the information that you want and to get the service that you're looking for, whether it's tax returns or a passport or what have you, that expectation from a just generic taxpayer side of the equation is going to be the same. We expect this thing to be fast and do what we want it to do. So I don't think we're going to be able to translate all that one-to-one. We're going to have to refactor some of it to be like, what is the federal government's mission in this particular area? We're not driven by profit, but we should be trying to get the best bang for the taxpayer dollar, right? So return on investment is still really critical. Piggybacking off a little bit of what I think we were talking about on the refresh cycle side of the world, there's also stuff we can learn from private sector, right? So this has been sort of an unexpected thing that we've seen in our embracing of different cloud tools, in that many of these major vendors, they're not just in this to serve the government and provide software as a service to the federal sector. What are they doing in terms of like multiple releases per year for this platform that they've actually crowdsourced features from their private sector customers, right? So we can take advantage of that as they're getting better, as they're seeing what their customers on the private side are demanding of them. We can take advantage of some of that. But by and large, a lot of it's not going to apply. We're just going to have to think about it with our government cap on and say, what does the citizen expect me to do in my little swim lane?
Well said, Rusty. So Karen, we'll give you a minute to any last closing comments on this issue. And
Sorry.
Just in general, I mean, I think that our best chance at keeping up with what the citizenry wants and to keep best on par as we can with industry is to be adopting and embracing really these new modern technologies. Everything happens faster now. Processes are better and paradigms are shifting and ways of working are becoming more efficient. And if that's sticking with that is our best chance at being as good as best as we can be.
John, close us out here, please.
Wow. Well, to respond to the gentleman's question, I clearly think that there are differences of missions between public and private sector organizations. You know, at the end of the day, as already stated, our business is not to make a profit, but to serve the American people. Nonetheless, we have to be extremely mindful. And, you know, I tell my team all the time, you know, the federal employees, you know, we all like took the oath the day we showed up. You know, we took the oath to be good stewards. And, you know, I personally take that really seriously. So I think that cloud is not the panacea. Cloud does not guarantee that we're going to have positive results. But I think that it provides a way forward, which, to use my former DoD terms, you know, can be a combat multiplier for us, can be a mission multiplier to help us do more with less. The trick is, and I'm a big believer in free enterprise, truly, but all of our vendor partners are, they themselves, in business to make money. And we, the government, have to figure out how to be smart about how to have a good partnership. about how to achieve our mission results, but also how to do so in a cost-effective manner so we don't find ourselves going broke saving money.